Good morning, everybody. They came to be healed. 5 ordinary patients, young and old, who entered a small New Jersey hospital in the mid 1960s expecting recovery. Instead, they slipped into a stillness no one could explain. Their hearts kept beating, their minds perhaps remained awake, and somewhere in those quiet rooms, trust itself flatlined. What followed would become one of the largest, strangest, and most unsettling trials in American medical history. A story where science, faith, and fear collided inside the walls of Riverdale Hospital. This morning, we opened that file. The press called it the Dr. X case. I'm Jeremy Vickers, and this is Of What Remains. It began as most tragedies do, without an audience. In 1965, Riverdale Hospital sat tucked behind a row of maple trees along Kinderkamak Road in Oradell, New Jersey. 80 beds, 2 operating theaters, a recovery ward that smelled faintly of antiseptic and floor wax. It was the kind of small community hospital where patients expected familiarity, a nurse who knew your name, a doctor who'd operated on your neighbor the year before. Among those doctors was Dr. Mario Enrique Yaskalovich, 40 years old, Argentinian born, tall, formal, and exacting. He had trained at Buenos Aires University, came north in the 1950s, and earned respect in New York and New Jersey for a precise hand and a quiet intellect. At Riverdale, he was both surgeon and tinkerer, designing instruments to make surgery faster. In 1965, the latest invention, a medical skin stapling device, was drawing interest from manufacturers. Colleagues called him brilliant if distant. Nurses said he rarely smiled. That winter, the hospital admitted a 73-year-old man called Carl Robeck for an abdominal surgery. The operation itself went smoothly. His pulse stabilized. His chart noted post-operative course uneventful. Then, just after midnight, a nurse wrote sudden cyanosis, respiratory failure, resuscitation unsuccessful, cause of death, respiratory arrest, or undetermined or of undetermined origin. The staff grieved but moved on. Post-operative deaths, though tragic, were not rare. Over the next 9 months, similar entries appeared in Riverdale's logbook. Margaret Henderson, 26. Nancy Savino, just a wee girl. Her age was 4 when she died. Frank Biggs, 59. Emma Arzt, 70. Each case began with surgery judged successful. Each ended in abrupt respiratory collapse. None of the deaths seemed connected until whispers started in the operating wing. An anesthesiologist remembered the surgeon bringing his own small box of drugs. A scrub nurse recalled a vial with an unfamiliar label. By autumn 1966, 2 fellow physicians, Dr. Stanley Harris and Dr. Alan Lands, were uneasy enough to check a storage locker assigned to Yaskalovich. Inside, they found 18 small bottles labeled Curare. Curare, a name that carried weight in medicine. Derived from South American vines, it had once been used to tip darts of hunters along the Amazon. In modern hospitals, it was used in minute doses to relax muscles during surgery, never without anesthesia, never without ventilator standing by. Its mechanism was exact and merciless. It blocked acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction, silencing the connection between nerve and muscle. With minutes, Within minutes, the eyelids droop, speech fades, limbs grow heavy, and finally, the diaphragm stops moving. The heart continues to beat, the mind remains awake. Without artificial respiration, death arrives through suffocation of a fully conscious brain. If a person were to experience curare without sedation, it would feel like being buried alive inside your own body, unable to move, unable to cry out. Every breath a silent command that never reaches the muscles meant to obey. That physiological truth, later repeated in courtrooms and textbooks, became the chilling center of what would be called the Dr. X case. Doctors Harris and Lands turned the vials over to the hospital administrators, who contacted the Bergen County prosecutor's office. The bottles were sent to the New York City Medical Examiner's Laboratory, where chemists confirmed they contained ditubocurine. Microscopic traces of animal blood and dog hair appeared on several vials, evidence that seemed to support Yaskalevich's immediate explanation. The curare had been used in animal experiments, he said, part of part of his surgical stapler research conducted on dogs. Investigators questioned staff. None had seen the administrator. None had seen him administrate the drugs to the patients, with no autopsy tissue to test and no eyewitnesses. Prosecutor Guy Calisi declared there was insufficient evidence of a crime. The vials went into storage. The matter quietly closed. Yeah, he claimed that he was doing experiments on dogs to, I guess, perfect his medical stapler. But he would inject the curare, so there would be no reflex action either. So he could use the stapler, and there would be absolutely no movement. It created the perfect situation for him to test his stapler. Although it begs the question, why were the empty vials returned to the hospital where inside his locker? It doesn't make sense. You would either throw them out or I don't know. Riverdale continued its work. Families mourned and moved on. Yaskalovich stayed on staff until the late 1960s, then shifted focus to private practice and patient development. For almost a decade, nothing more was said, but unease lingered. Nurses talked of the blue deaths. Some remembered the locker. Some dismissed it as gossip. The hospital changed administrators, replaced beds, repainted walls. Time eroded memory until one winter morning in 1975, when a letter arrived at the New York Times. It was unsigned, a few short sentences only. Strange deaths at small hospital in New Jersey. The surgeon's name is Yaskalovich. He kept curare in his locker. Check the records. The envelope landed on the desk of reporter Myron A. Farber, a seasoned investigative journalist known for precision and persistence. He began verifying the claim. County death indexes listed multiple post-operative fatalities under one surgeon's name between 1965 and 1966. Farber visited the courthouse in Hackensack, copied public death certificates, and started making calls. When he reached Mary Savino, mother of the 4-year-old wee girl Nancy, she told him the story she had repeated for years. Her daughter had been recovering well from the minor abdominal surgery, laughing that evening, and then suddenly gasped for air and was gone. The hospital had called it respiratory failure, cause undetermined. Farber asked if she knew that curare had once been found at the hospital. She did not. She fell silent. Farber tracked down former Riverdale employees. Several confirmed the 1966 locker discovery. Others admitted they had long suspected something was wrong. On January 9th, 1976, the New York Times published Farber's first front page story. Inquiry into 1966 deaths at New Jersey hospital revived. Surgeon linked to drug curare. To avoid prejudice and an uncharged suspect, the paper just called him simply Dr. X. Public shock was immediate. Within days, Bergen County prosecutor Joseph Woodcock reopened the investigation. In March 1976, a judge authorized the exhumation of 5 bodies under the supervision of Dr. Michael Baden from New York's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Forensic pathologists removed preserved tissue and sent samples for advanced chemical testing. Laboratories at Hewlett Packard and at the New York Medical Examiner's Office used immunoassay and gas chromatography, techniques capable of detecting microgram quantities of alkaloids, even in embalmed remains. The results were mixed. Some samples, notably from Nancy Savino, showed molecular fragments consistent with curare. Others were ambiguous. Nonetheless, on May 20th, 1976, a Bergen County grand jury returned 5 indictments for murder against Dr. Mario Yaskalovich. He was arrested, released on bail, and immediately denied every allegation. I am innocent, he told reporters. I never gave curare to any human being. What followed would stretch across 2.5 years. Hearings, pretrial motions, and the slow machinery of science being forced into the courtroom. Experts debated whether curare could survive a decade underground, whether embalming fluid could mimic its spectral lines on a chromatograph. Defense attorneys argued the tests were junk. Prosecutors insisted they were revolutionary. Meanwhile, the man at the center of it all continued living quietly in Tenafly, New Jersey. Cut off from peers, his surgical career in ruins, awaiting a trial that could bring the death penalty. Outside of Bergen County, few yet realized that the story of a handful of unexplained hospital deaths would soon become a national reckoning over medicine, evidence, and the freedom of the press. While the experts fought over molecules, another confrontation brewed in the background, one that would decide how far a courtroom could reach into a newsroom. From the start, defense attorney Raymond Brown suspected that the New York Times reporter Myron A. Farber possessed information favorable to his client. Perhaps interviews or leads the prosecution had overlooked. Brown served a subpoena ordering Farber to surrender every file he had gathered for his 1976-77 articles. Roughly 200 interviews, letters, and notes. Farber refused. He said the promises of confidentiality he'd given his sources were binding. Revealing them violated both ethics and the public's right to investigative journalism. Judge William Arnold ordered him to comply. When Farber still refused, Arnold held him in contempt of court. Some of the newer generations may not realize this, but once upon a time, there was a term that was held sacred to reporters. It was called journalistic integrity. They had to tell the truth, and that's what their drive was. Now, today, maybe not so much. On July 20th, 1978, sheriff's deputies escorted the reporter to the Bergen County Jail. The Times itself was fined $100,000 plus $5,000 a day until the notes were produced. The newspaper appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The justices let the contempt orders stand. For 40 days, Farber sat in a county cell while the trial continued without him. Across America, editorial pages raged. Journalism professors called it the most serious freedom crisis. The most serious press freedom crisis since the Pentagon Papers. Yet Farber did not relent. When he finally walked out, gaunt, unshaven, and his tie still knotted, he said only, "My sources are safe." He would later receive a special Pulitzer citation for his stand, and his case would become the model for the New Jersey Shield Law, protecting reporters from similar subpoenas in the future. Inside courtroom 404, the jurors kept listening to scientists, prosecutors, replayed the chemical charts. Defense lawyers dismantled them line by line. The pace was exhausting. By August, the trial had stretched past its 13th week. 2 counts were dismissed for insufficient proof, leaving 3 alleged victims, Carl Robeck, Frank Biggs, and of course, Nancy Savino, still before the jury. The state's closing argument was quiet and methodical. These patients, the prosecutor said, these patients trusted the hand that healed. They awoke, felt the weight of paralysis, and could not cry out. He pointed to the chromatographs, to the exhumed reports, to the vials once stored in the hospital locker. "This is not coincidence," he said. "It is a pattern." The scary thing is, Um, I wonder what happened to those patients, what they experienced. When curare is given to them, they can't move, they can't scream, they can't talk. They're locked inside their bodies, and um, and they're aware of everything. They can feel everything. That's terrifying. Brown rose for the Brown rose for the defense and spoke for 4 hours. He called the science alchemy dressed in electronics. He reminded the jury that not a single witness had seen an injection, that state's own experts had used words like possibly and consistent with. You are not scientists, he said, but you know what doubt feels like. If you feel it now, your duty is clear. After 34 weeks of testimony, the more than 250 witnesses, the case went to the jury. On October 24th, 1978, the courtroom filled beyond capacity. The clerk read aloud, on the first count, not guilty. On the second count, not guilty. And on the third count, not guilty. Dr. Mario Yaskalovich closed his eyes. His wife wept beside him. The state's case, 5 deaths, 5 exhumed bodies, 2 years of preparation had ended in acquittal. Judge Arnold thanked the jurors for extraordinary patience in matters of science and law. Outside, cameras surrounded the surgeon. He said little. I am vindicated, he told one microphone, but my life has been destroyed. Then he stepped into a waiting car and disappeared from view. For the families, that verdict landed with mixed force. Mary Savino said only no verdict can bring her back. Frank Biggs' widow told a reporter she had wanted answers, not vengeance, and now had neither. Doctors Harris and Dr. Lanz, the men who had found the vials 12 years ago, or 12 years earlier, declined all comment. The headlines shifted quickly. Dr. X acquitted. Beneath the bold type, small editorials debated that the trial had proven, or what the trial had proven. The Times defended its reporting. Medical journals dissected the forensic methods, concluding that science had been asked to do more than it could. The reason why I'm covering this story is because next week I'll be doing the story of the Angel of Death, a nurse who killed up to 40 patients. Um, and I wanted to cover this story because the court case changed how New Jersey, at least, or the country, how they managed medicines in the hospitals. From there on, you had to have a doctor and nurse, and sign it off, and it was all done right. Back in the day, I guess they just they grabbed whatever they wanted from the drug room, I guess, and they had carte blanche for to do anything with their patients. 2 years later, the New Jersey Board of Medical Examiners reviewed Dr. Yaskalovich's license in light of unrelated malpractice complaints. After hearings, the board revoked his rights to practice medicine in the state. He surrendered his New York license soon after and returned to Buenos Aires, Argentina. Colleagues said he worked quietly in a small surgical post there, seldom speaking of America. In 1984, at the age of 57, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died. There was no obituary in the United States. The New York Times did not run a story. Riverdale Hospital renamed itself to Northern Community Hospital and then closed the same year. The building was demolished, replaced by housing. Only those who remembered the trial could locate the ground where the recovery rooms were once stood. That's how the curtain fell on what had begun as a routine night in a small New Jersey hospital 13 years ago, or 13 years earlier. No convictions, no clear answers, just a case that forced three professions to confront their own boundaries. Hang on, I wanted to talk to you about this other thing. So, his coworkers and the nurses, the nurses and would speak of more deaths than were recorded. They suspected that between 15 and 20 people were killed under Dr. Yaskalovich's hand. It was a nightmare. It had to be back then, but nobody knew. You trusted your doctors and you trusted the way things were done. This guy, I believe, was so focused on his own fame by creating a device that would staple closed, openings from in your body, and he was actually witnessed to remove sutures and then restaple. So this was everything to him, this stapler. I don't even know where he got the dogs from to constantly experiment on. But yeah, so 2 years later, okay. So that's how the curtain fell, like I said. When the verdict came down in 1978, Hackensack fell silent. The courthouse emptied. The news vans rolled south towards Manhattan, and the town that had hosted 34 weeks of testimony returned to the rhythm of a small town life. But for medicine, law, and journalism, nothing would be quite the same again. Let's see, medicine's reckoning within months. And this is the important part here. What was changed? And this changed the whole country on how we practice, or how doctors and nurses practice with the medicines in that hospital, or in hospitals in general. Within months, professional journals began dissecting the trial. Pathologists, anesthesiologists, and pharmacologists debated in print what the State versus Yaskalovich case had shown, that forensic toxicology in the mid-1970s was still too primitive to settle questions of life and death beyond doubt. Some articles praised Dr. Michael Baden's attempt to extract chemical truth from 10-year-old tissue. Others warned that the prosecution had pushed science beyond its limits. Something was going to give. He was taking these curare and using it in abundance, apparently. Um, and it took so long for people to realize that something was really wrong in that hospital. Something was really wrong with Dr. Yaskalovich. Um, but he continued to be more focused on his invention and himself, because you have to imagine, if you're the doctor and you're seeing that so many of your patients are dying almost immediately after they get out, after the surgery, for the same in the same cause, respiratory, suffocation or whatever. And you kind of wonder what he must have thought, but he still continued to do it. So in that, you have to find him a little bit suspect, or a little more than suspect. Um, some articles, okay. Hospitals across the country took note. By early 1976, the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals quietly circulated new recommendations for handling restricted drugs, neuromuscular blockers, curare, and its modern relatives, uh, pancuranium and vecuranium. These medical terms are something. I'm pretty good with them, but these are killing me. Where to where to be kept under double lock and key. Their withdrawal logged by a nurse and an anesthesiologist. At teaching hospitals, lectures cited the Riverdale story as a case study in vigilance. Residents learned that the same substance that made delicate surgery possible could, in the wrong hands, mimic natural death almost perfectly. And that's the other thing. I guess that's why it took so long for other people to notice. But how come? Because it all just seemed natural. But from the doctor's point of view, from Yaskalovich's point of view, he had to have seen that something was going on when up to possibly up to 20. And when I say possibly, this comes from nurse reports, police findings, um, up to 20 deaths on his watch under his knife, post-operative. I just don't understand. I don't understand how you wouldn't know. So see, the case was like, oh, oops, the doctor, was a little reckless. But this is more than reckless. This is, after nearly 20 patients dying because of your insistence to use your stapler and use it with the curare. So it creates the perfect situation for you to close the wounds. It's just mental. It's mental that no one else saw this way sooner, or himself. So at that point you have to think, well, this was purposely done, and he didn't really mind the deaths. Maybe he thought, when you make an omelet you have to break a few eggs, but this it's just crazy. The state of mind you have to have. I mean, he was a brilliant surgeon. um he was Everybody said that, his surgeries were near flawless. He had highly skilled hands. But then, oh, we know what happened. So, anesthesiology as a specialty through discomfort, the profession's newsletters reminded members that curare like agents do not cause sleep or pain relief, they only silence the body. Every trainee was taught never paralyze a patient until you know they cannot feel. That maxim, repeated for decades since, owes part of its urgency to the lessons drawn from Bergen County. So, silence learns its limits. For forensic scientists, the trial became a cautionary tale. Um, in conferences from 1979 onward, chemists cited State versus Yaskalovich when discussing sample contaminations, chain of custody, and perils of over interpreting weak chromatographic signals. The case exposed a truth uncomfortable to both sides of the courtroom. When evidence is microscopic and degraded, even honest experts may disagree completely. It led to the creation of new standards, validation protocols, blinding of control samples, replication of tests in independent labs that later became routine under the umbrella of what would be called the forensic quality assurance. Those reforms carried forward into the DNA era. By the 1990s, analysts tracing genetic material at the nanogram level often mention Yaskalovich's debate on the moment American forensic science learned humility. Now, law and the press. The courtroom battles that put New York Times reporter behind bars reverberated even more widely. Before 1978, only a handful of states had statutes protecting journalists from being forced to reveal confidential sources. Farber's 40 days in a county jail changed all of that. In early 1979, the New Jersey legislature passed one of the nation's strongest reporter shield laws, guaranteeing that no journalist could be held in contempt for refusing to disclose unpublished materials except under the most extraordinary circumstances. Other states soon followed. Farber himself never returned to daily reporting. He wrote a book about the case, Madman or Murderer. That's a really good title. And later became an editor at the Times science desk. When asked years later whether he regretted going to jail, he said, "No, my promise was my word, and a reporter's word is his only currency." Wow. I wish we had more reporters like him then today. He died in 2012 at the age of 82. Still remembered in journalism schools as the man who went to jail rather than surrendering a notebook. The families. For the families of the 5 named patients, the acquittal closed nothing. Same accepted, some accepted quietly, saying they were tired of courtrooms and headlines. Others kept boxes of clippings and transcripts, convinced that something terrible had happened that science simply failed to prove. A few pursued civil malpractice suits. Some were settled or dismissed within a few years. When reporters revisited the story in the 1980s, the relatives declined interviews. They wanted peace, not another round of speculation. Privately, several said they had at least gained one comfort. Their loved ones' deaths had prompted reforms that might save future patients. That's true. Yeah. You got to think about all the lives that were saved since. The surgeon's exile. After the trial, Dr. Mario Enrique Yaskalovich attempted to rebuild his life. His Bergen County home was sold. His license of practice in New Jersey was revoked in 1980 after separate malpractice reviews, as we said. He surrendered his New York credentials soon after and returned to Buenos Aires, where he obtained a limited hospital appointment. Former colleagues there later described him as reserved, courteous, and intensely private. He performed minor operations, lectured occasionally on surgical stapling, and rarely mentioned the United States. We covered that. On October 16th, 1984, he died. And, well, I guess nobody in America mourned him. Riverdale's End, back in Oradell, Riverdale Hospital was renamed, and now it's rubble. The case inspired documentaries, laws, debates, and a 1979 television dramatization that fictionalized the events under changed names. Writers and filmmakers were drawn not by gore, but by the questions the case left behind. How much proof does science owe the law? How far should the press go in pursuit of truth? And what happens to trust when a hospital society's refuge becomes the setting of suspicion? Each retelling kept those questions alive, but offered no new answers. So, the Dr. X case was never really about one doctor or five deaths. It was about how fragile certainty can be when medicine, law, and human grief intersect. The courtroom asked science to draw a straight line from molecule to motive. Science, honest but limited, could only sketch a probability. Between them fell the verdict: not guilty, not proven, not forgotten. Today, when anesthesiologists count vials, when toxicologists validate an instrument run, when reporters cite shield law protections, traces of Riverdale Hospital remain, embedded not in tissue samples, but in procedure, policy, and caution. So now everything's said and done. That may be the case's only legacy. Those five graves reopened, one surgeon acquitted, and three professionals made wiser by their uncertainty. The verdict was rendered decades ago, and from a locker full of curare vials to a courtroom divided by science, the Dr. X case left no certainties, only lessons in medicine, in law, and in truth telling. Doubt is not weakness, it's the guardrail that keeps us human. So, why was I really covering this case? I think I said um, next week we're going to be covering the Angel of Death story, which is about a nurse who killed up to not up to he killed 40 people is what he did. So was what he did a blessing to the patient and their families, or was he a serial killer? That's what we're going to cover. He used morphine to kill them, and this was well after the Dr. X case. So we'll be curious to discover, how he was getting the morphine and how come it wasn't missed. Um, but well, and he was like one of those unassuming guys, uh, funny, friendly. Some of these cases are very emotionally taxing. How do you feel about this? But this other line kind of changes what you were thinking about. And so, as far as Dr. X goes, was he a murderer? That's the big question. Did he murder up to 20 people just to experiment with this medical stapler that he invented? Um, that's the big question. But so until next week, we're going to cut this one a little short, I think. Until next week, I will be seeing you again on Of What Remains. So I want everybody to be kind, because that creates tolerance, and tolerance creates resiliency. And if you have that, nothing can take you down. So be kind to each other, and I'll see you next week.